right, hi y'all. My name is SaraDaniels. It's great to be here with you today. I'm visiting from Seattle, Washington, as you heard, and I work for a company called Foods. I've had about 20 years in the fish industry. I've worked on fishing boats, in fish processing plants, and owned the fish market. And for the last 10 years, I've been with Foods as their fresh division manager. Do I point it at the...
Yeah.
Okay. Uh-oh.
I was kind of blocked.
Am I pointing the wrong end?
Maybe. Oh, sorry. Go ahead and keep talking. I'll fix it right
Okay.
here. Sorry.
All right, I'll try and do it without the slides. Foods buys fish directly from the fishermen. We have 4 plants in Alaska. We have a plant in Bristol Bay called Coffee Point Seafoods. 2 plants in Cook Inlet called Pacific Star Seafoods, and another one we just purchased called, can't remember the name, it's so new, sorry. They're right next to each other. And one in Yakutat. We also have a processing facility in Seattle. Our bread and butter are really salmon, wild Pacific salmon and Pacific halibut. And I'm here to talk about wild salmon and Pacific halibut. Oops. All right. So Alaska wild salmon is available primarily in the summer months. The reason for that is that they're all heading back to their ancestral rivers to spawn. So pretty much from mid-May until right about the end of September, depending on the species, wild Alaskan salmon is available. King salmon is available all year long, although in not very much abundance through the wintertime. The specific timing of salmon fisheries throughout Alaska is determined by the Alaska Department of Fish and Game. Basically, they monitor every fishing area, every river that is commercially fished in Alaska, and make sure that enough salmon are heading upriver to spawn and sustain the runs. Alaska is really, I don't know, if not the best managed sustainable fishery in the world. Let's see. Halibut season runs mid-March through mid-November. The International Pacific Halibut Commission determines the overall yearly quota. They do this through monitoring the biomass, as well as watching the migratory patterns of the halibut. But the season generally always falls sometime, usually mid-March through mid-November. So halibut is a bottom-dwelling fish. It's long-line caught. Long-line boats can be very, very large, or as small as a skiff. Large vessels, for example, will have around 40,000 pounds of halibut per trip. And small skiffs will have anywhere between 300 to maybe 3,000 pounds. The difference in a large vessel and a small vessel, other than the size, is the length of the trip as well. So large vessels will go out for as much as 5 or 6 days to try to fill up their fish holds as much as possible before delivering. And small vessels will go out, put their halibut strings in the water in the morning, go out in the afternoon, bring them back to the plant. So clearly there's quality differences based on the age of the fish and how long the trip has been, how many fish are in the fish holds. That can all affect the overall quality of the halibut. It doesn't mean that large boats have poor quality. It's just that obviously a fish that's 24 hours out of the water is certainly a fresher, nicer day boat quality fish. Logistically, just make sure I'm on the right slide. Logistically, there's 2 ways that we get halibut from Alaska to the lower 48. Trucks carry halibut down from Alaska. That's a 3 or 4 day truck journey, and then it's staged in Seattle to be dispersed throughout the United States, and by air. So clearly, by the time a trucked halibut from Alaska reaches a distributor like Fruge, those fish can be sometimes as much as 14 days out of the water. And it's something that is on the opposite end of the spectrum, a dayboat halibut fish that's flown the same day almost that it's landed at the plant will be maybe 2 days out of the water. So the quality difference is going to be clear between those two large boat, small boat, trucked, or flown. So one thing that I have been asked to talk about, which is always a concern for anybody that's purchasing Pacific halibut, is chalky halibut. Chalky halibut is when the meat of the halibut is very milky and it doesn't have that translucent look. Basically, chalk halibut is lactic acid that has built up in the fish due to a change in the pH of the body of the halibut. There are a couple of theories about why this happens. I have to just make sure I'm on the right slide here. Hold on a second. Yep. So water temperature. So during the summer months, especially in August and September, when the waters are warmer, not only in Alaska but in Canada and Washington as well, the water temperature is warmer, and that's when we tend to see more chalk halibut, crop up, become a problem. As well, there's a theory that when the fish struggle when they're being caught, the adrenaline releases lactic acid, and that changes the flesh as well. So how can we prevent chalk halibut from reaching Fruge or you as consumers? Well, we can't. However, what we can do at the plant level is we can test the halibut before it leaves the plant to see if we can prevent sending anything out. Two ways that we do this is we cut their tails, and you can take a peek at the meat and see if it has evidence of chalk or just the non-translucency of the flesh. We also pH test them. The challenge is, however, that chalk halibut is a progressive issue, and so despite our best efforts at times to send non-chalky fish or cull the chalky fish out and send, the best fish that doesn't seem to have a problem, is that it's a progressive issue, and so perhaps the chalk has started in a different area of the body of the halibut that we didn't do a test in, and by the time a distributor receives it, and if it sits for a couple of days while they're working through their fish, by the time they're cutting it, it can present chalk. So chalk costs the industry a lot of money. They say, there's research that's been done that out of every 60 million pounds of halibut that is caught, 2 million pounds is chalky. That's very expensive. So the map on the right shows the migratory areas of Alaskan halibut. You can see that they migrate as far away as Russia, which Sara Palin can see from her cabin, and all the way down to Washington and Canada. The migratory sort of behavior of halibut is monitored by the International Pacific Halibut Commission that I mentioned earlier. They determine basically the biomass and the health of the overall biomass. The catch areas of Alaska each have a different size range that they typically produce. So for example, and it's easier for me to show you on the, Anyway, so if you can see the Aleutian chain, which is that isthmus that comes out, and there's Kodiak Island right there, which is sort of I don't know, almost midpoint of the map. That is an area where if fishing boats are fishing there or longliners are fishing there, that produces mostly 10-20 or smaller halibut. Larger halibut typically are caught in southeast Alaska, which is sort of towards the edge of the map in the middle on the right. So that would be southeast Alaska. Halibut sizing ranges, the way we size them, is 10-20, 20-40, 40-60, 60-90, and 90 up. The desired sizes typically for food service are 10-20 and 20-40s. And the size of the halibut is directly related to their age. So obviously the smaller halibut are the younger halibut, the larger halibut are the very old halibut. All right, so salmon have differences between them according to their catch areas as well. So if you look at the map on the left, you will see some of the predominant river systems throughout Alaska. That certainly doesn't show all of them. There's thousands, if not, I don't know about millions, but thousands upon thousands of river systems that are commercially harvested in Alaska. The ones that you're seeing there are the largest and the longest and the better known. Right, so what are the differences between wild salmon species? Well, on the exterior, there are certainly differences in their markings. Some have spots on their back and spots on their fins, some don't. That's a very basic description. I don't think we have time to go through the educational process of identification, but there are exterior differences. There's also a difference in seasons. On the interior of the salmon, there's subtle differences between the meat color and the flavor. One of the most important determinants of taste in salmon, however, is their fat content, or oil content. Everybody's familiar with omega-3s. That's fat, essentially, at least in a salmon. So what makes the difference between a salmon that is high in fat versus one that's lower in fat? Basically, it has to do with where it's caught, what river system that it is native to. So, a very basic way of describing it is very fatty salmon come from long, cold, rivers with a lot of elevation gain, or some combination thereof. So salmon are still feeding when they're in the salt water. They're bulking up. They're eating as much as they can. They're getting ready for that long flight. They're preparing for the marathon. The end game, spawning, up at the end of the long, cold river. When they enter into the freshwater, they stop feeding, essentially, especially the farther upriver they get. Or maybe they're eating bugs or worms, but nothing substantial. So basically, their fat content is what allows them to have the fuel to get upstream and to get where they need to go. And depending on which river they're from, they're indigenously sort of pre-programmed to have a certain oil content or fat content. That affects the flavor of fish. There's a significant difference between a sockeye from one area, for example, Bristol Bay, which has the lower oil content, and say a sockeye that comes from Copper River, which is a long river with, not a very long river, but with a significant elevation gain. Two rivers I'd like to use as an example is the Yukon River, which everybody knows. It's a sort of famed for its amazing fish and high oil content. It's kind of got a cachet. As well as the Copper River. The Yukon River is 2,000 miles long with a 2,100-foot elevation gain. And the Copper River is only 300 miles long, but it has a 4,500-foot elevation gain. And is also fed by glaciers, so it's very, very cold. So both of those salmon are well known. They've been heavily marketed. They taste great, of course, and so that part is why they're so well known. They're extraordinarily delicious because of what is indigenous to them. There certainly are, however, many other long, cold rivers with a lot of elevation gain throughout Alaska, hundreds of them. I have been asked many times, does Copper River salmon is it really the best? Well, it's great, it's awesome. However, it's also heavily marketed, and it's the first fish. So there's plenty of other sockeye coming from plenty of other areas in Alaska. Later in the season, you'll pay a lot less for, and have equally as excellent flavor due to its fat content. So how is salmon caught? 3 methods, primarily in Alaska. The first one is gill net fishing. A gill net is a drifting net. The mesh, or the filament of the net, is colored to try to match the water that the fish are swimming in, so they can't see it. And so the fish are swimming where they're going, either heading up a river, at the mouth of the river, or along the beaches on their way to the river. And they don't see the net, and they swim into it, and their gills get caught. And then once the fisherman has made what we call a drift, they pull the net aboard and they pick the fish out of the net. I would say the majority of sockeye salmon caught in Alaska are caught in this method. Troll fishing, really known as the highest quality catch method. It's ocean fishing. Basically, one way to describe it would be having 100 fishing poles in the water at once. It's hook and line. The fishermen bring the fish aboard. They clean them on the boat. They're packed in ice, and generally produce a very, very high quality fish, simply because the guts are removed very quickly. It's sort of a boutique way of catching fish, if you will, in comparison to the high volume fishing that gill netting, as well as purse seining, which I'll talk about next, produce. So purse seining, the last one, is the highest volume catch method in Alaska. Essentially, a boat will be trolling around looking for schools of fish, and once they find what they think is a good opportunity, they will release their net, and they will try to circle the school of fish, and they will slowly purse that. They'll bring the ends of the net together with a seine skiff, which you can see on the, anyway, that's a seine skiff down there. And they'll pull that net together and purse up the fish, and basically you have like a fish mosh pit. Lots of fish swimming around, and hopefully you get a good set. So those are the 3 main catch methods for Alaskan wild salmon. And again, they all have different quality considerations that go along with each of the catch methods. There can be benefits to one versus another, and problems with one method versus another as well. So, what makes a salmon have the best chance of, salmon are perfect when they're swimming in the water, essentially. So, when we pull them out of the water, there's this process that has to happen that we have the best chance of presenting the best fish for you to work your magic with at your fish shop or in your kitchen. So initially, when a fishing vessel pulls salmon aboard, ideally what should happen is they should pop the gill of the salmon so that the blood of the fish can let out naturally. What that does is it removes the blood, or it prevents the blood from leaking into the meat of the fish. So you prevent blood spots in the fish, You extend shelf life. Just generally, you get a much better meat quality, and as well as icing. So icing the fish down, even when it's still got the guts in and it's on the fishing vessel, it's extremely important for fishermen to cover that with ice, whatever they've caught from that set, and before they put the next net out. Keeping it cold is really paramount to preventing belly burn and decomposition. We actually pay fishermen on average 5 to 15 cents more per pound to bleed and ice the fish. That's how important. Well, and thankfully they're cooperating, and that's becoming more of a standard practice for Alaskan salmon. With handling, the best way I can describe it is the less the better. So the less that you are jostling a fish, touching a fish, packing a fish, pumping salmon, whatever needs to be done to get it from the boat to the plant, to a box, to a freezer, less is more. Anytime you're handling fish, and I'm sure not just salmon, there's more opportunity to mess it up. There's potential for bruising, to have it bend in a certain way where, you're not going to see anything wrong with it on the outside, but when you cut it open, you'll have gaping and all sorts of issues with the meat. So really the golden rule of handling is less is more. Temperature control, that's a pretty obvious one. If you can keep fish at an ideal temperature, for salmon, 34 to 38 degrees is really ideal. Packed in ice. If they're already cleaned, put ice in the belly. It really puts it in suspended animation and really prevents the decomposition. Extends shelf life, prevents all sorts of problems. Catch area. I know I talked about catch area in terms of specific rivers having different, pretty different qualities of salmon based on the length and the water temperature and elevation. In this situation, I mean catch area, are they caught in the ocean or are they caught upriver? So there are fisheries where they catch fish upriver. When fish are swimming upriver and get farther up a river, their bodies are essentially dying. They're changing. So the meat gets more pale, it gets softer, skin darkens. It doesn't mean that you can't have a nice quality salmon that's caught farther up a river, but there is more potential for problems. So it's important as a buyer, I guess, is what I'm trying to say, to know where your salmon was caught. For example, right now the Columbia River in Oregon has their salmon, king salmon and coho fishing going on. And we buy in 2 locations. We buy what we call the lower river and the upper river. And there's a significant quality difference between the 2 fish. 2 different audiences that would buy that fish. So I think the point being is it's important to ask. Time of season also has something to do, a lot to do with what you'll end up receiving. So a lot of times towards the end of a season, the stragglers that are coming in are starting to blush out. Sorry, I'm using fish terms that I should explain. Their skin is changing. They're getting pink, and their meat is softening, and they've even if they haven't started swimming upriver, they're going to start to decompose. It's just the end of the run. So that's something to consider when you're purchasing salmon as well. Hopefully, talking about the quality basics kind of helped sort of explain how some of these quality issues and causes happened, and that's pretty much all I've got.
Good.
Thank you, Sarah. Sarah was extremely nervous. She did a fine job. Thank you for doing that. Powered through it. Hang on, don't go anywhere. Just come back and do one more job. Any questions first? Got one right here. Hang on. I got you. I'm in charge of the mic.
I was just wondering if the chalk aspect of the halibut reflects in the taste.
Oh,
Good question.
If you have chalky halibut,
Yeah.
I think it less as much with the taste, but more so with the texture. And there's different stages of chalk, so, and there's some confusion for people between what's truly chalky and what's actually mushy halibut, and those are actually two totally different things. Chalky halibut's edible. People just don't like the way it looks, and sometimes it can purge moisture more so than non-chalky fish. So some of the applications that we have found for chalk halibut, because we have to hopefully find a home for it, because it is still edible, is as a fish and chip, for fish and chips or fish tacos, something like that. Something where it doesn't have to, not have to be as pretty. It's less of a taste thing than a look or texture thing.
You get your choice of a hat or a shirt, which one you like.
You actually get gifts for asking questions. Who's that?
He saw the camouflage hat.
How do I get a hat? And
I should get a hat. I was curious about bleeding. Is it a matter of a gill clip, or is it just simply a evisceration and a soaking in water, or is it a
Well, on a
general
fishing,
process?
sorry, I didn't mean to interrupt you. On a fishing vessel, what I was talking about with bleeding is literally reaching your finger into the gill flap of the fish and pulling the gill. And the fish, you should do this even when you're sport fishing. Honestly, you'll get a much better tasting fillet. You pop the gill, and trust me, I've had carpal tunnel and fingers from gill popping. It can really wreak havoc on your fingers, but it's so important to the end quality of the fish. There are other methods for bleeding on troll boats, so they will actually power bleed fish, and this is a very sort of boutique sort of way of handling it, but they'll take a hypodermic and power suck blood out of the spine. I've never seen it done. I've never done it myself. I've never worked on a troll boat before. So those are the two methods. Gutting the fish obviously is important. It's getting the guts out of fish as fast as possible is really important as well. I mean, it will affect the quality of the salmon.
Andy, right over here.
Sarah, quick question.
Yeah.
A lot of people in here don't realize they cut the halibut quota for 3 years in a row.
Yes.
Any prediction for this year? Because it's killing the fishermen and it's making
It
the
is, and the
prices.
prices are really, really high.
Yeah.
I've heard two things. I've heard that they're going to cut it for one more year, but then I also have heard rumor that they feel that after this year that things will stabilize.
Cool.
So the IPHC website, which I referenced here, and I can certainly email it to anybody or email it to Mark or Richard, is a wealth of information. And I would highly recommend taking a look at that. It will keep you posted on any sort of updates in the research. It'll talk about chalky halibut. I actually refer to that website as a fish PIM, right? Because it tells me how much fish is actually going to be landed in Alaska, and I can predict the market a little better, right? So if I see that 500,000 pounds is coming in, I kind of know where the prices are going to go. So other than that as well, it will keep you updated. The IPHC has their meetings in January every year in Seattle, and that's when all the scientific findings are presented, and that's when the quota is established, and based on that scientific evidence, and the opening dates are also announced.
All right.
So
Thank you.
we'll see. I wish I had the answer.
Yeah.
cool, thank you. Any other questions?
This price point. You say that you have this mushy halibut.
Mushy halibut.
You have the
Chop.
quality chop some
Mhm.
halibut. You have a really nice halibut. price point. I mean, I think we interested in the price, you know. It makes a difference.
Yeah.
It makes a difference between each to another, you know. Like high quality Hollywood is going to be $15-$60 a pound. Sorry. And the mushy is going to be like 10, 9. It makes a difference. So sometimes as you know, I buy a lot of fish, so it's really hard to see any difference between that. Do you guys separate and say, you know what, this is going to be this price a pound, and this high quality is going to be this price a pound? It is that way, or
Yes.
it's graded same way, and the price point is the same way?
Well,
Same way.
every company deals with it a little bit differently. So you have the situations where you send a customer what was supposed to be number one, you know, halibut that doesn't have chalk. And we do everything we can to prevent sending chalky halibut to customers, because basically it's just a problem we have to deal with if it gets to the customer, and it's disappointing the customer and the customer's customer, and on it goes. If a customer of ours receives chalky halibut, and a lot of companies do this as well, because we pay the same to fishing vessels for chalky fish as we do for non-chalky fish. It's not tested at the dock. You buy the load of halibut and you pay cash, and the fisherman, you know, goes out fishing again. They don't think about it twice. So what we do if a customer receives chalky halibut, especially if it's only a small amount, is we have a protocol where they pay 50% of the H&G price for that chalky fish. Up to a certain point. I mean, certainly people are overloaded with chalk fish. It's challenging for them, because a lot of people have not established outlets for that chalky fish at a fish and chips place, or a fish taco place, or a buffet, or something sort of that's not high-end restaurant. I, like many others that sell halibut, are always looking for outlets for chalky halibut. But sometimes it ends up in places that, you know, you didn't intend it to, right? With your high-end food service distributor, who's likely not going to have a home for chalky fish. So I guess my answer is that 50% less than number one H&G fish. On a frozen basis, there's many times where I have to ship that fish back to Seattle, cut it into halibut fletch or loins, and I freeze it. And then I have fish and chip customers call me in the wintertime and say, hey, do you have any chalky halibut fletch that's frozen? And once you freeze chalky halibut, it's really hard to tell the difference between, you know, other number one frozen halibut. I mean, it's just somehow the freezing process sort of disguises that. So I guess if I'm in a roundabout way, yes. Would love to sell you cheap German halibut. I always have more than I need to deal with, and it's always a problem. So I'm looking for solutions too, and yes, there is a discount. As well, there's a discount for sort of the undesirable sized fish. So often in Yakutat, Alaska, we get 90 fish, 200-pound fish. Well, those fish don't fit in boxes, and they really don't. They don't work well with the specs that you're creating for your customers. So we have to cut them into chunks, and we sell it fresh that way. Well, we used to freeze them. And then we'd have a problem selling them frozen. I mean, they're unwieldy. They're huge suitcases of fish, right? So we finally figured out that, and a lot of people who buy normal H&G fish don't want to buy chunked halibut. That's just not going to work with their program. So we started selling it for $2 less per pound fresh. And guess what? I haven't frozen $1.90 a halibut this year. So yes, there are discounts for the undesirables.
One last question.
One last question. Who's got the camera?
You can speak loud enough.
Can everybody hear me?
Yes, we can hear you.
Thank you, Richard. You sort of intrigued me because you're sort of talking about different rivers and like hidden rivers that have really good quality. Do you have a blog, or do you communicate with Richard saying, this stuff is really excellent.
Yes, I can.
You're sort of talking like a wine connoisseur, and everybody wants
Yes.
the wine that's next to the really cool place.
Yeah,
Are you-
right,
are you-
the grapes are basically the same, but it
These-
just doesn't have the advertising.
These
And
guys,
maybe, to be honest with you, what happens, is, speaking of wine, there are great varietals, great rivers, but everyone goes back to the old favorite, the Copper River. They go back to that one bottle. So, you're right, there needs to be some education.
but what
on
I'm saying
the
is
rivers.
if she has a blog site to communicate, the best way of selling fish is to have an educated server and an
Yes.
educated chef. So if you have this great wealth of knowledge in your head, but it stays in your head, then it doesn't help them sell fish. So do you have a blog? Or does
You know, we
Richard-
do have a blog on our website. I don't think it addresses what you're asking about. And I wish I could have had more time to go through all of the rivers in Alaska, but we'd be here for a month.
No,
So,
could
but
you
I
maybe
know some
do-
specific ones.
maybe
that-
do a weekly update for these guys?
Sure, yeah, I can certainly work on that, and now that we're getting into the winter season when I'm less crazy busy with selling tons of salmon, I can work on something like that, and of course I will advertise the areas where we are positioned so that you know how special our fish is.
You're not supposed to say that, okay?
I know. Well, listen, here's the other thing. You know, we're a producer, we have our own product, but we also have supply partners, and a big part of our daily activity is trading. So we have the relationships to trade and to buy not only Copper River salmon, Kuskokwim king salmon, Yukon king salmon, chum, everything else as well. And that really comes with being in the industry for a very long time and having a very good reputation. My bosses have done an incredible job with that. So we have access to pretty much every kind of salmon that you would want. It just takes some planning.
Great, thank y'all. We have one last deal. Everybody get a white ticket? Anybody not have a white ticket? Everyone's got one? Perfect. All right, we're going to have you draw, Sarah, for a gift card to SaraDaniels. So you guys can go buy some cool chef stuff, whatever you like. So go ahead and grab us a cool ticket.
Okay, who has number 545920? 545920. All right.